But you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends, and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. And now here's your host, Rich Barris.
All right, folks, and we are back inside the numbers with the People's Pundit. I was hoping there wouldn't be feedback here. I guess you're not hearing it because I'm not. All right, listen, in case it looks like a lot of you just didn't hear me, but yeah, after the election, look, there wasn't a light bulb working in my house. I neglected my home for a long time and needed to take some time, which I didn't wind up being able to do anyway because I've been kind of busy working through some of the data, but other stuff too that I want to share with you today. And there's a lot I want to get through. Economic stuff, of course, all the election stuff. I'd like to even preview Georgia and Alaska. Don't forget, the embeds will be up live. They will work for those who missed. I guess if you're not on locals, you didn't hear. We did talk with Decision Desk about what happened on election night. And look, it wasn't their fault. It was something that somebody did. There's a contract everybody's got to abide by. You have to implement these embeds and the real-time results as instructed. And if you don't, then you hijack the Decision Desk's resources, which is what they did, pass everything through their token, you crash the entire damn system. And a client did that. That's what happened to them. So we're sticking with them because they're better than the AP. This is growing pains for their company. They assured me it's not going to happen again. I'm tech savvy. I understand what they're talking about, what happened. And they did it at the last minute. So it couldn't be caught during testing. So they took advantage, and that's very unfortunate because they screwed everyone in the process. All right, but Georgia, Alaska, that will all be good to go. And those embeds will be up on People's Pundit Daily, which you guys will be able to watch. And we're going to have live coverage of it. We're going to do that, obviously, on next week, actually. I mean, it's coming up. All right, so and I would like to preview that because we do have some polling for it. But this looks like record-breaking turnout, which is part of, by the way, I want you to keep that in mind. I mean, early voting just started on Saturday, and yet they're already shattering records. So keep that in mind when we go through what happened in Arizona and why some of the explanations that are being put forward are just absolutely absurd explanations. This was I would actually like to tell the entire story so people understand what happened. All right. All right, and what else here? The economic outlook. So today, with the exception of a GDP report that looks rather strong, I mean, it would be under normal circumstances. With the exception of that, there's some really bad economic data. And for those who don't follow investor relations for the big Wall Street firms, then maybe this will be the first time you're hearing some of this. But I mean, immediately after the election, Morgan Stanley changed their housing outlook. It's not good. It's not good at all. So I want to talk more about that now that the election is behind us and we have a chance to fill the show with other content that we have always liked to talk about here. All right. So, and then of course, when we do this next national poll, which is coming up, we'll ask the Economic Voter Confidence Index again. Listen, it looks like, I don't know until I do it myself. You know how I am. I don't like to trust anybody else but myself. But what we're going to see basically is I think it's a bounce back. I mean, if you're comparing apples to apples, it looked like Governor DeSantis had a bounce. And I think I know why that was. But now he's receding again, and it looks like Trump is taking the top spot again in some of these tracking polls that have been asking a while. I didn't want to ask the nomination question before the midterms because, honestly, it really isn't relevant. That's a long time in politics. And now that midterms are behind us, we can check it out, right? And we can go from there as to what what our trend will look like. All right, but I think that I do believe the bounce for DeSantis. I'm going to tell you why that is. Republican voters, the old, the late Rush Limbaugh used to say that the only one who could break the bond between Trump and his voter is Donald Trump himself. And, speculating how you can do that, breaking a promise, for instance, right? And he all throughout his presidency, he did not break any of his core promises. The wall is the one where I think people can make a pretty good argument over, but he did, in fact, for what was being built. I mean, you just never saw it covered. But if you ever visited the Customs and Border Patrol website, you would have seen a topographical rooftop view, interactive map of parts of the wall going up section by section. You just never saw that because people didn't cover it. But it, in fact, was there for everybody to see. And he would always say, I'm going to get China to pay for it. Well, I mean, of course, it came from budget, moving around stuff in the budget. He took some money from defense to do it that was appropriated for defense. And he would argue that, of course, it did make China pay for it because we got all the way through phase 2 of the trade negotiations and that we had put into place that really had China, on their knees until COVID came. That's the truth. That's the reality. All right. But it didn't get completed. It didn't. But that was still not enough to break a major promise. He moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is something Republicans and Democrats have promised to do for a very long time. It was very key to his evangelical base that he do that. And one of his biggest promises or greatest promises was realized after his presidency when he ended Roe v. Wade. And he told people during the 2016 election that I necessarily will end Roe v. Wade because I will put forward Supreme Court justices that will vote against Roe v. Wade. And of course, we know, at least for the most part, he did, right? So I'm just looking at some of the notes here. Right, he said Mexico would pay for it. That's right. Yep. Okay, so that's true. And again, the same thing stands. The renegotiations of the trade deals, and he would argue, is what they did, in fact, pay for it. All right, but that's, let me get a check from Mexico. It was never how he promised he would do it. All right, so, I think, however, what happened is that he went after, and you know why, I mean, especially locals, you guys know why. We've been over this ad nauseum. He went after DeSantis and Youngkin after the midterm, which is clearly a disappointment for Republicans, regardless of the House, right? Even the House was an underperformance. And we'll get into talking about, I think people jump to conclusions before they have time to accurately pour through the data. Exit polls are all we have to deal with now, but soon we'll get research from Pew and the census, which is certainly more reliable, and then we'll be able to draw better conclusions. Like, for a good example of that, 2012, everybody thought that the Hispanic vote is what did Romney in. That was not true. I mean, if you looked at the exit polls, with what you had, Geraldo Rivera wrote, Hispanic voters flex their muscles and, doing Romney, wrote on Fox Latino. The next day, that simply was not true. In fact, Hispanics made up a smaller share of the electorate, and they turned out at a lower rate than they had in the past. Made a smaller, there were more total Hispanic votes, but they were a smaller share of the electorate. Barack Obama was reelected because he did better with working class voters. Mitt Romney didn't get enough of them out, and because of turnout did not decline among African Americans, and they voted for Barack Obama in insane numbers like they did in 2008. That's what reelected Barack Obama. So the polls were right that year, but for all the wrong reasons. All right. So with Trump, I think by attacking DeSantis and Youngkin, at least temporarily, Republican voters, disappointed, upset, angry even, were looking at those two examples, Youngkin in 2021. It was a red wave in Florida, which, I mean, we told you was going to happen. That was never competitive. I mean, fundraising was a scam. I mean, any Democratic fundraising operation in Florida was a scam. Ron DeSantis was ahead by double digits a year before the election. This was never going to be close. And Val Demings was never going to give Rubio a challenge. If you look across the board, DeSantis as a governor didn't outperform Rubio all that much in some of these key areas. Miami-Dade, DeSoto, right? Even in areas like Duval in the Northeast, where Democrats have thought that they had made some better gains. In Alachua County, both Rubio and DeSantis cracked 40%, which is where Gainesville is, right? And turnout was massive. Hillsborough, Pinellas, both fell to both candidates, right? So it was an across-the-board thing. As a governor, you could expect a gubernatorial candidate, especially an incumbent, to perform better than someone at the Senate level because of partisan voting index is stronger when it comes to federal races than state races. All right, so attacking them kind of like poured salt in the wound at the moment. It doesn't matter what your reason is for attacking them. It just voters, it turned them off because they are wins in an otherwise kind of dim outlook for them. So it just pissed them off for the time being. But it does look like since then Trump is recovering because in several of these polls, in several of these polls, he bounced back. All right. So so basically, going through all of this, let's see. Let's talk about Arizona. All right. Let's talk about Arizona. There is an article today in Arizona that basically says that it is unlikely that what happened in Arizona impacted some of these races. The AG race is 500 votes. So that's a much easier case to make. But the gubernatorial election is the one that will have a legal challenge. All right. I want to explain why this concept that, how could I put this? This concept that turnout was higher in 18 in some of these areas, and that nationally it was lower than 18. So what we saw in Arizona was like maximizing as much as you can get in a midterm outside of a general election. All right. That is not, that is absolutely a defunct argument. It doesn't make sense if you're looking back solely to explain this with turnout in the prior years. It doesn't. And I'm going to tell you why. If that was the case, and I say this all the time, no election is the same, no electorate is the same from one year to the other. Turnout rates, how many demographics come out, none of it is the same. So you can't look back at turnout in prior midterms to explain or to refute the fact that it could have been higher than it was. If that was true, there would be no precedent for the turnout levels we saw in 2018. No precedent for it. But pollsters and others, like myself and others, knew that it was going to be high. Why? Because that's just how it works. You model, you look at likely voter modeling. Mail-in voting definitely changed the game. It made it easier for people to vote, but it doesn't necessarily mean that only mail-in voting will see increases in turnout. Election day, we saw a lot on election day, and that's it. We can't possibly see any more. That is not a solid or valid argument. If that was the case, we wouldn't have seen what we saw in Michigan. We wouldn't see what we're seeing in Georgia right now. We wouldn't see what we saw in Texas, in Florida. There were, even though turnout nationally was down, you have some of these big blue states where turnout was not high. Hold on. High population centers. But in like California, for instance, it's a perfect example. It wasn't that high at all. Hispanic voters did not come out in droves in California. So the electorate was whiter in some of these areas where there were key congressional districts, which was good for Republicans. That helped them. But you can't simply just use turnout to say, well, look, in Maricopa, and let's talk about what they're talking. Let's look at the article they're talking about, and let's compare the turnout there. Yeah, I know. Laura's over there like Mexico. Yeah, I know. I said it. Mexico was the one who was supposed to pay for the wall. That's right. We already brought that up. All right. Let's bring this up. And let's talk about the argument they're making. Could Election day problems, and this is so-called analysis. Could election day problems have impacted turnout? Many questions have been asked about Maricopa County's election day printer issues that impacted 31% of vote centers. Let me just stop right there and say, because as we get into some more of the data that I'm going to share with you in a second, on election day, election officials, both Stephen Richter and Bill Gates, said that it impacted about 20% of the vote centers. Because we added a question for election day voters, do you think that it impacted, did you have a problem when you went to go vote? Because we did that, we already could see that it was at least 30%, all right? Or at least, there's a sampling error, of course, in every survey, but it looked like they were 30%, all right, not 20. Unless we were we were hitting voters that were having more issues, right? So we were not getting a representative geographic sample, and that's not what happened. We actually were. And the Washington Post later confirmed that that's where they're getting this 31% number from, even though it is possible it was more. I always try to be conservative. Let's just go with the 30%, all right? The most important of which is if the problems were enough to impact the outcome of statewide races. There is no denying that the issue identified as a problem with the heat fusers in the ballot on-demand printers resulted in long lines and major inconveniences to voters. An analysis by ABC 15 and the elections analytics company Split Ticket, and that is, again, I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but they're supposedly I'm not going to click on them, but I don't know that bipartisan is really the right way to put it, but they found that it is unlikely that the problems it is unlikely that the problems adversely impacted turnout in Maricopa County. The analysis looked at historical midterm turnout figures in Arizona since 1990. In the 2022 midterm, Maricopa County voters turned out at a rate of 64.2%. This is a higher number when compared to the state, which had a turnout of 62.5%. This is not a given. In fact, it is the exception. Yes, it is, but it is in fact what we saw in both pre-election polling and exit polling. We expected that. It was unusual to see Maricopa more than 62% of the statewide vote, yet it in fact, with modeling, it in fact was projected to be higher than it had been in the past. It doesn't mean because in the past it has never been that high. Or how many times in the last 2 election cycles have we seen first time for everything? Right? Because it hasn't been in the past does not mean it never can be. Maricopa had a higher turnout than the state in only 3 of the past 9 midterms, 1990, 06, and 2022. So what? An incumbent president has never been defeated without any, has never been defeated when they won the core 4 states, North Carolina, Iowa, Florida, and Ohio. An incumbent president has never been defeated when he increased the total number of votes from his prior election. An incumbent Republican, an incumbent president, period, has never lost the state of Wisconsin if they lost the county of Juneau. They've never lost the election if they won every single pivot county in Iowa. So what's your point? You're telling me it's happened 3 times in the past, so it can't happen again? Because it only happened 33% of the time? In statistics, 33% is a pretty high likelihood. It's not at all highly unlikely. It's 1 out of 3. Maricopa had a higher turnout than the state in only 3 of the past 9 midterms, 90, 06, and 2022. In this past midterm, Maricopa's turnout was 1.7 points above Arizona as a whole, the largest difference since at least 1990. So what? In 2020, there had never been an increase in the total number of votes in Maricopa County alone like we saw in 2020. And that benefited Biden, yet nobody seemed to care about that anomaly. That was not a justification. And here's their graph. I want you to actually look. There's Maricopa as a whole. It's lower than 2018. You're telling me it's not at least plausible? It could have been slightly higher, and we're going to get into some of those numbers And a small percentage, folks, a small increase, because a lot of people I've seen, like Mike Cernovich and others, tweet things like, well, hey, Palmade is one thing, but the governor's race, that's a lot of votes. It's not at all when you're talking about 1.6 million votes. And especially when you're considering, it's not when you're considering, it has to be considered when you're considering where the problems occurred and the margins that were coming through on election day in those areas. All of that has to go into the equation when you're deciding whether or not these problems really could have impacted the outcome of the election. Maricopa makes up about 62% of the total votes cast in Arizona, largely influencing the state's final turnout number. Yeah, that's absolutely true, but it's been ticking up, actually. Why? Because it has had a significant population increase. It used to be only 59%, 60%, yet it has steadily been rising. So it would not have been it wouldn't have been out of the norm, nor would it have been unexplainable if Maricopa actually made up 64% of the statewide vote instead. Yet we don't even have to look at a scenario like that for that to put the margin in the red zone. All right. When Maricopa County's turnout is compared to Arizona's 14 other counties combined, another pattern emerges. In presidential election years, the state's largest county always outperforms the rest of the state in election turnout. Let me tell you when patterns get broken. When there has been mass migration from state to state into areas like Maricopa County, which we have seen, we have measured, and we have published over and over and over again. Maricopa County is one of the #1 destinations for people leaving New York and leaving Illinois, leaving California, especially California. They go to Maricopa County. They go to other states like other counties like Clark County and Washoe in Nevada. And they go to Florida. But Arizona, as we showed over and over and over again with you people in survey results, this is a top destination spot. And it's not just us. It's not just our survey showing that. American Community Survey, one after the other. Census, we just got a brand new, which is the ACS is a smaller version of a full census. We just got one from the U.S. Census Bureau. It absolutely confirms. So it would make sense. Not only would it make sense, you would expect Maricopa to continue to increase as a share of the state's voting electorate. And the opposite is true, they're saying, for midterms. In 22 years, right, and you're saying that much of the exemptions have been over the last 9, right? So 3 out of 9, mostly heavily weighted towards only one in the 90s, the rest being in the latter part of 10 years or so, right? Because the 10-year mark is where mass migration has taken place. In 2006 and 2022. Those are their exemptions. Those are their exceptions to the rule. Maricopa had higher turnout than the rest of the state combined only twice, in 2006 and in 2022. So basically, and here's their chart again. All right. Again, my point is that you can't use prior turnout over decades when the state has changed so much to make the case that there could not have been a marginal impact. And here's where they really go off the rails here. All right. Hold on, where is this statement? Because this is what they're leading up to. There are claims on social media that due to election day issues, hundreds of thousands of Maricopa County voters may have been disenfranchised. The data immediately dispels this. I'm not arguing 100,000 or plus could have been disenfranchised, but it is absolutely possible. Tens of thousands could have been disenfranchised. And if you look at the margin in the areas where this was happening, and when you look at how the election day share of the electorate turned out to be less than most expected, it is very plausible to at least use a conservative number and say, let's say it was 13% instead of 11%, right? So just in Maricopa, election day was 13% of the share of the electorate instead of 11%. That's a 2% increase out of 1.6 million. You're looking at ballpark 30,000+ votes. If you're looking at the areas where this happened, and we're going to go over it in a second, I'll show you the margins county-wide, not just in these areas, county-wide. Then, folks, 35,000 votes, 31,000 votes is enough, with the margin being roughly 70% for Kari Lake. It is definitely enough to put Hobbs's, vote lead right now in doubt. It is. It's simple math. It is simple math. She would net about 16,000 votes. All right. So with the vote, being just under 17,000 right now, give or take, plus or minus here, plus or minus there, it is definitely enough at the very least to put it in automatic recount territory. If not, and I'm again trying to be conservative with the amount of people that could have been turned away. I think sometimes it is easy for politicos like us. I mean, we live and breathe this stuff. I think it is very easy for us to forget what it's like to be a normie, just like a non-politically obsessed, normal voter. Like the guy we spoke to in the first 11 minutes of voting on election day, who said, I tried to go to the polls. I know I agreed to participate in this survey. I tried to go to the polling station in Maricopa, the one by me, on the way to work. They're telling me that the machines don't work and that the wait is going to be very long. I will try to come back after work. And that person, that individual, not alone, did not complete their questionnaire. They did not vote. If you don't think out of 1.6 million, 2%, 3% could have been affected by that, and you're trying to use prior turnout rates, that's your argument? I am wholly unconvinced. And again, what people are trying to, let's get rid of this for a second because I want to show you the difference. The most important thing is the difference in behavior by vote method and the locations of where these people were impacted. All right. And I don't really see a reason why I can't share this at this point. All right. All right. So this is overall people who voted by mail in Maricopa County alone. All right. 55-44. That is very close to what it actually turned out to be on election day. And again, this is unweighted, and I want to make that clear. It isn't market site where we wait. This is, I want to show you so people don't accuse me of weighting variables to make the math work. This is, simply unweighted results. It's fairly representative. You would need to tweak it almost, very, very lightly for region, a little bit for gender, which I've done. It doesn't change the overall result that much. I'll tell you what it does. It's a little bit more female. So it actually gets Hobbs to about 50, just over, almost 56. And it brings Kari Lake down to just about 44. Right? So, and then other write-in being 0.6 of a percentage point right now. I believe that falls, and some of that falls and goes to Hobbs. But it's, we're talking about four out of 622 interviews. And this is, look, only Maricopa, right? Statewide, that is very close to the margin that Kari Lake lost the early vote combined to Katie Hobbs. Now, if we look just from people who voted on election day, you're going to see this number change quite a bit. All right. It's quite a difference. When it's weighted, it's really like 71%. All right. In Maricopa, she actually won the election day vote more than she did in the so-called rest of the state in our exit polling, with Pima being about 0.1% of it. So, given that Pima, that's roughly what Pima is, 16-17%. So it makes sense that it would weigh it down somewhat. But in any event, if people voted on election day, aside from location, where they are actually voting, almost nothing else has such a strong relationship with vote preference. If you are a Democrat who voted by mail, you were almost nothing as far as crossover. But if you were a Democrat who voted on election day, then you voted in single low double digits for Kerry Lake over Katie Hobbs. If you're an independent, and actually let's do that, and let's just stick to Maricopa. Let's first look at Democrats who voted on election day, and then we'll go back to mail. So actually it's a little bit higher here. If you get rid of only Maricopa, you'll see statewide. It's such a small statewide. You can actually see Kerry Lake does a lot better with Democrats who voted on election day, right? But now watch. If you look at Democrats who voted by mail, it's nothing. Basically nothing. 1.5%. If you look at earlies, traditional vote by mails, they arrived Saturday or Monday. They were not dropped. It's even less than that. I think it's like 0.6, 0.8, something ridiculous. So vote method has had an enormous impact on vote preference. And since we're only talking about those who were impacted voting on election day, this obsession to focus on party doesn't really tell the full story. And again, let's look at independents. If you voted by mail, you voted significantly higher for Katie Hobbs than if you were an independent who voted on election day. Okay, watch. Very different result. And I'm sure you guys can see that, right? Please tell me I clicked that thing so I didn't have to repeat myself. All right, good. So this obsession over what the party split was, in some of these areas, it doesn't tell the whole tale. And let me actually read you a little bit of precinct level is a little bit of a heavy lift. And it doesn't even matter. In Maricopa, you can vote anywhere if you're a resident, and a legal voter of Maricopa County. You could go to one area 1 year and go to another polling location another year. It doesn't matter. You don't have an assigned precinct or polling station. All right. That's just not how the law works in Arizona. All right. So as a share of each party, and forget about what the electorate by party looked like on election day, because all that's going to tell us is how many people, how many more Republicans vote on election day than Democrats. That's irrelevant, right? I mean, it's not that it's irrelevant. It's a known quantity already. We already know that Republicans vote more on election day than Democrats do. All right, but as a share of each party, 58.6% of those identifying as a Republican reported having issues while trying to cast a ballot on election day. Almost 60%. And I want to make something clear here. This data doesn't capture people who walked away. We only know or can generally estimate what that is by simply subtracting the amount that agreed to participate and had been, contacted at some point, and instructed to fill out their questionnaire or conduct their interview when at the time they vote. Right? So many of them felt bad that they didn't, fulfill their commitment. It's like, I was going to do it. I know I started it, but I wasn't able to vote, and I'm sorry. Or maybe I'll collect that gentleman. Maybe I'll come back later, and then if I do come back later and vote, I'll fill out the questionnaire. If the judge extended voting, would that gentleman have come back? I don't know for sure, and neither do you, but it is at least plausible to suggest that him and many, many others did not, but would have. All right, so of those who reported problems, why does this matter what I'm reading right now, by the way? Because I want to show you that this was not equitable. Where the issues were was not equitable. And for a guy like me, who is a pollster by trade, I would expect to see issues random. Random. And how would I know that? By location and by, obviously, there are going to be more Republicans in the electorate, but the share of each party, or non-party for that matter, who reported having issues should not be a huge, there shouldn't be a huge disparity between these shares if it was random. And if it wasn't isolated, or at least disproportionately impacting one stronghold for a party over another. And look, I can't prove intention, but I can tell you it should be random. If this was a legitimate act of, or I would say a legitimate quagmire, I would have expected this to be random. And we'll talk more about districts in a second, but 58.6% of those identifying as Republicans, nearly 60%, reported having issues while trying to cast a ballot on election day. That compares to just 15.5% of Democrats. And almost about 40% of those who identify as independent or some other party. So why were independents and Republicans so much more likely to report having issues? We know that they're going to vote more than Democrats on election day, but it doesn't matter. This is not how many people were, how many of each party was in the electorate. This is a share of each party. What does it tell me? It tells me that liberal strongholds in Maricopa did not experience the problems that Republican strongholds did. And there's another way to, or at least it suggests that. And there's another way to look at it and to say whether or not that's accurate or not, right? So it's suggesting it's enough to form a hypothesis, but is there anything else that corroborates that? And that's what we'll get to here. So partisan data reported hourly and throughout the day by the Maricopa County Reporter absolutely confirmed our projected partisan affiliation, and it was extremely accurate and within the sampling error. Those who indicated there were a problem, but however, again, all that tells you when you look at just the share of the electorate, not the share of each party, all that tells you is that Republicans and independents are more likely than Democrats to cast ballots on election day. So that's why it's more important to look at the share of each party that reported experiencing an issue. All right. These issues were exclusive to Maricopa County. With responses by congressional districts varying, the impact from tabulator issues and other challenges, and they didn't, know at the time exactly what it was. We now, like read before from that story, that they have changed from, it was the tabulator not working to it was the printer not working. I think we've seen during hearings that, that there were very clearly other issues going on as well. But regardless, issues and other challenges were very clearly experienced by districts in which Republicans outnumber Democrats. Of those who reported problems casting a ballot on election day, just under 30% live and vote in Congressional District 1. That's David Schweikert's district. You may remember that until some of those later Republican ballots were reported, Schweikert was actually trailing. That was not a race that anyone really viewed to be in doubt. Yes, he had been moved to some areas that were more Democratic friendly than in his prior district, but nonetheless, there was enough of Republican advantage in the first congressional district that nobody really believed, especially in the year we were going into, where Republicans would win the popular House vote. Nobody really expected David Schweikert to be in danger as he appeared, the danger, serious danger that he appeared to be until all the votes were counted. And still, by the way, it was not a resounding victory. Let me just stop right there before we go on to the rest of the districts that were reported. There are in Arizona 1, the new Arizona 1, 38.2% identify as Republican or are Republican registrations. 28.6% are Democrat. The incumbent again was David Schweikert, a Republican, and the advantage overall obviously is almost 10 points. It's Republicans are 9.6, so higher than Maricopa overall. And Maricopa is an interesting case, and it really does lend more credibility to the findings because there are so many districts that cut through Maricopa, right? Arizona 4, that is a Dem district, and yet only 14% who lived in the fourth district reported having problems on election day. It's still, nonetheless, when I say a Dem district, it is still home to Republican strongholds. Stanton, he won it, but he didn't win it by very much. But it's still a slight registration advantage for Republicans, about a half a point, 32.2 to 31.7. Arizona's 5th congressional district, again, about 30%. Of those who experienced it, about 30% were in the 5th congressional district, the biggest Republican stronghold that cuts through Maricopa County. 42.5% are registered Republicans, 23.2% are registered Democrats. giving the registration advantage to Republicans of almost 20 points, 19.3. That's Biggs's district. He actually, if you remember, there was an independent on the ballot, and that independent got quite a few votes. So Biggs's win was not as big as it normally is. Again, this one's tricky because remember, it was a Democratic area that was in danger. And of course, I'm talking about Arizona's 6th congressional district. Ciscomani did win it. He wound up edging out the Democrat. All right. So there's about a 3-point registration advantage in that district. And yet 14% roughly who reported having problems were in that district. And again, Debbie Lesko's district was another chunk, that's Arizona 8, where there were these massive problems. And that's a 14% Republican advantage, 14.5% to 26.1%. And again, these issues, while these issues impacted a not so significant number of voters across Maricopa, it is very clear that they disproportionately impacted Republican districts and the strongholds in those districts where Republican candidates were expected to net large numbers of votes from those who cast ballots on election day. And this impact is not fully understood without understanding voter behavior. Voters who vote on election day, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of race, regardless of education, are significantly more likely to support Republican candidates. Party affiliation or registration aside, parties implement different strategies to turn out voters for elections. And even Democrats and non-two-party voters are significantly more likely to support Republican candidates who vote if they cast their ballot on election day over casting a ballot through mail, which I just showed you before. So in this area, in this county wide, Republicans were, depends from Kerry Lake to Mark Fincham, right? So Kimberly Yee was doing the best. Abe Hamadeh ran second. Kerry Lake was very close to Abe. And then you had others like Fincham and Masters who were lagging behind them. But nonetheless, from Kerry Lake and above, that margin was, or I would say that total share of the vote was coming in at 70% in these areas or more. So we're not, the disappointing margin, I wouldn't even argue it's true. The disappointing margin for Republicans came through those election day drops. Yes, they turned out to be more Republican than males, like early males, but they weren't the margin that some Republicans had been hoping for. However, the margins for election day were huge. And that is all we're addressing right here. That's all we should be caring about. And and again, this is me being conservative, because even though we know, folks, we know for a fact that there were people who had their ballots that were technically mail-in ballots that decided, I don't know if I want to drop my ballot here today. What's going on? Is it going to be counted? This is the idea that you're using turnout as an excuse for why there couldn't have been more votes in Maricopa. That's ludicrous. That's absolutely ludicrous. That makes a very, very not persuasive argument. That's my point. You should expect Maricopa to become more of a share of the electorate in the state of Arizona as time goes on, because that's where the population increase is coming from, right? And there are some in Apache, etc., but that's where it is. That's where the lion's share of the vote is in the state. Goes Maricopa, so goes the state. And actually, in fact, the margins from these other counties on election day, because they didn't have any problems, there are some Republicans who could actually still lose Maricopa County but win the election because of those election day margins that they saw, even in Coconino, one of the more liberal areas of the state. It still didn't matter. Vote method was stronger than identification and others. Oh, did you look at the label? You looked at the label. Don't look at the label. Just put it down. That's a Christmas present. Put it down. No, you looked at the label. You did. Baby. Just put it down. You saw it. Throw it to me. Give it to me. You saw it.
Show everybody.
Oh, it doesn't. It doesn't say it.
Can you show everybody?
Yeah, so you could look. Nice try. It doesn't say it. Just store number. Right? Yes. Ha! Ha! Aha! So, yeah, and I'm putting aside all of some of the issues of people that have said that, that basically they didn't have their votes counted. I mean, that's a separate issue altogether, folks. I'm talking about the possibility with everything that has gone on, that everything that went on, if you're not a Politico, you don't understand, or I mean, if you are a Politico, maybe you have forgotten what it's like to be a normal person who's just not obsessed with voting. If this would have happened in Atlanta during Souls to the Polls, Democrats would have gotten, at the very least, they would have had a judge extend the period at which they could vote. They get it all the time. Here in North Carolina, people may have forgotten. In North Carolina in 2018, Republican operatives got caught tampering with like 4 absentee ballots or something, and they got an entirely new election. So this idea that this doesn't happen is nuts. Of course it does. And in fact, Republicans were fine with doing a new election, and they won by a larger margin than they did in that first round, which was on election day during the midterms in 18. They were confident enough that they could win the state, even though those operatives were playing with ballots. And apparently they were. I mean, you don't make excuses no matter who does it. They were messing with, votes. And if it was a legitimate instance of fraud, then there should have been some remedy for the Democratic candidate there. And by the way, the voter, because it is really more important than which candidate is being impacted. It's the voter that's being disenfranchised. And if you look at I should have taken a break already, but the Rasmussen poll should scare the hell out of everybody. The Rasmussen poll that came out today should scare the hell out of everybody. And Byron, before I take a break, I mean, that is something I wanted to address. Do I believe the 17,000 box 3 number? It sounded very low to me. Maricopa has especially between the hours of 6 and 9 o'clock, it has a very long and rich tradition of that is when, you'll see like a gangbuster election day number. There is no doubt that number was very low to our projections. And now we know why. I mean, without a doubt, that's of course, it makes sense. And from what I understand, and this is not just from people, this is from lawyers that we've spoken with, those ballots were not, that draw 3, box 3, that's been around for a really long time. It has. And in fact, to be fair, some other counties don't even have tabulators, and they all use what is like the box 3, draw 3 kind of method. The difference with Maricopa is that this time it doesn't look like in many of these areas, those were labeled and handled properly, segregated properly, and that brings with it a host of other issues. So it's hard for me to say that number is low because they may have accidentally mixed in some of those votes with, for instance, election day drops. From what I understand, in one polling location, they appeared to have put them in with those that were dropped off on election day that were actually mail ballots. So that still, though, would not, it just makes for more uncertainty, because election day drops actually turned out to be a little bit larger than projected. When I say a little bit, I mean like a percent. We still projected a huge percentage, about 15% would be election day drops. And by the way, we were right. Even though a lot of people did not believe that number, we were right about that. Where we were wrong was the percentage of election day votes. And it doesn't appear that anyone else fell short. It's just that we did expect Maricopa to be a larger share than it has been in the past, as they're arguing is like some great body of evidence for their not making it unlikely to have impacted the race. We're talking about a margin that's so large that you don't need hundreds of thousands of votes, folks. If 2% of the 2% were turned away totally, so it went from 11 to 13, which is not a heavy lift. That would have been enough in these areas to put Hobbs's margin in doubt. And it most certainly would result in a recount. All right, so I'm a little bit shocked, and there's not much that shocks me anymore, not in this world or in the realm of politics. And for somebody who came from, where I came from, all right, it is absolutely true that the higher you go, the dirtier it gets, right? It is just, I don't know who came up with that quote, whatever it may be, but that, man, they are right. All right, so street crime to white collar, it gets worse the more and the higher you go, folks. It does. And John, what is the maximum number of ballots? I can tell you that we were missing about, and it's very, very difficult for me to make any high, like I really would much rather be conservative than throw out some bigger number. But I wouldn't at all be surprised if 5% walked away. I wouldn't at all be surprised. That is a relatively small number of people. And while in a midterm, you have the most dedicated voters, just from the number of people that, told us, that they had issues, and the enormous amount of polling state, because we did ask them, we said, listen, if you don't mind, do you mind telling us what precinct you were at? And there were two reasons for doing that. One, to basically identify areas where there were no issues, and then two, to boost or buoy, claims that some of these areas were really just not up for conducting an election. Like, they were so bad that they did not do, what's the word I'm looking for? They didn't do their job. They didn't do their job. Yeah, and Escobar. Yeah, I mean, look, folks, I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I was raised a normie, just like you. All right, so it truly is true. The higher you get, and the so-called more reputable, the more decent group of people, the worse it really gets. It's absolutely true. All right, what else? Let's take a break. But when we come back, we will go over some of the economic news. Certainly not done there. I just wanted to explain how minimal of a number we could be talking about, because they want you to think, and he said it right in, well, it could have been hundreds of thousands of ballots. It doesn't need to have been hundreds of thousands of ballots. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands of voters that voted by mail, by drop, by election day. We are simply talking about people who showed up on election day to cast a ballot. And those people were such a huge, huge margin for a Republican candidate. Now, I don't think that puts the Senate at, I think at the end of the day, they need to look to Mitch McConnell and others for why Kelly was able to survive the way he was. Would it have been closer? Yes, it would have been closer. But I don't think Blake Masters would have been able to overcome it. Going over some of our polling, that last minute push to Masters, I think at that point there was probably just too much mail-in, and it would have had to reach more of a 2020 level turnout. And there was evidence that we could absolutely have exceeded 2018 in states like ours. And by the way, that's another thing. We did exceed turnout from 2018 in many of these battleground states where some were competitive, some were not. So why is it okay to say that the turnout in Michigan is historical, but that just fueled Gretchen Whitmer's win by a bigger margin than people thought? Why is that okay? But looking at the possibility that there would have been more voters had there not been these problems in Arizona is not okay. By the way, Democrats just replaced Nancy Pelosi with a full-on election denier. You can't make this stuff up. Hakeem Jeffries was a collusion truther. He pushed collusion, and he called the election of Donald Trump illegitimate. Over and over and over again. You cannot make this stuff up, folks. All right, so let's go to a quick break. Oh, I didn't get my thing up here. I may even do a thing before we do some reads. I may just do a little 30-second countdown so I can drink some water. Yeah, stay tuned. Let me get a sip of water. Stay tuned. We'll be right back, and we'll go over some economic stuff and more on the Arizona stuff. I mean, I see your questions in the corner of my eye, and I'm trying to get to as many as I can. But the truth is, I want this like buttoned up, and I'm trying to be as conservative as I can be. So, look, it doesn't help. It doesn't help to exaggerate either way, whether you're on the side that wants to ignore what happened here, or you're on the side that thinks that it could have had a huge impact. I would like to be more measured. It's just at the point where these races were so close. To have something happen like this is really on par with like Southern Democrats getting really creative about keeping Black Republicans from voting in the Jim Crow era. This was a massive, massive blow to self-governance, folks, and voter sovereignty. This is a very significant historical event in our history. There are not many other examples of debacles of this measure. You know, we always have issues here and there, Mercer County in New Jersey, you know, something like that. There are always issues. This was a widespread, very obviously not random issue that disproportionately hurt one party over the other. And that is an injustice. We'll be back. All right, we're back. Listen, couldn't do the show without all of you, of course, but also our fantastic sponsors to the show. And I want to thank you guys for, obviously supporting them. We're going to go over some economic stuff in a second. So, how appropriate both of these will be. Basically drought, inflation, the drill, folks. Even the new policies, which we are going to discuss, they're definitely pushing our food supply and our supply chain to its breaking point. And survival food is more important than ever right now. Do what we have done, Laura and I have done, create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriots survival food kits. We're talking about good for 25 years, super survival food, hand-packed right in a family-owned facility in the US of A. The kits are compact, they're sturdy, they're water-resistant, and they stack easily. They have delicious breakfast, lunches, dinners. You can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. Just add boiling water, simmer, and serve. Go to 4patriots.com/TPP to get your 3-month survival kit for only, I don't know what it is now. Go check it out. But you'll get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus 10 free gifts and free shipping. They're called 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities to support our veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com/TPP to build your own stockpile today. And while you're there, folks, if you're browsing their fantastic website of awesome other stuff, don't forget to use the discount code TPP10, obviously TPP for the People's Pundit, 10 to get 10% off your site-wide purchase across the board. TPP10. All right. So also to, oh man, I'll tell you, with the exception of the GDP report, I hate to say, I'm just not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. It's the end of the year, and many of you are probably wondering what maybe you could do with, if you have anything laying around, to get, what's the word I'm looking for? Tax favorable, moves that you can make at the end of the year. And that's why I just made the call the other day. Again, love this company. Last time the economy looked this bad, folks, the stock market tanked. I'll never hear the end of it because gold skyrocketed, silver skyrocketed. I'll never hear the end of it from my wife. The economy collapsed. Inflation hit record highs. At the same time, all precious metals went through the moon. It could happen again. And I don't want to have you miss out on what could be the biggest gold and silver boom of our generation. Visit tpplikesgold.com. tpplikesgold.com. Check out GOLDCO. You can get $10,000 or more in free silver. That's tpplikesgold.com. Again, you know what's pretty cool about this company, actually, on the sidetrack from my little script here? You can go and and you can everywhere too, but they have like this great selection of what you want. Just make sure you have obviously a good way to store it. All right. But it will. Diversification is the name of the game when you're looking at the economy we are looking at. I want to say GDP should be a lot more. I want to say it because it's true. Earlier this morning, the ADP jobs report for November. Okay. This is a little bit concerning. I hope December doesn't look like this too, because we're supposed to be getting the holiday hiring season. And it is true that there is a lot of e-commerce that's taking away some of this, but retail sales, the retail inventories, by the way, also out today, does not look good. We heard all of this like new norm kind of, they're excuses. It's the new norm. Retail sales are going to be crappy. It's the new norm. We're not going to see very big hiring for the holiday seasons anymore. That turned out to be the excuse under Barack Obama, but it did not happen under Donald Trump. Retail sales and hiring exploded. And, we were this close to housing becoming that. The economy under Trump was strong, but the housing market wasn't yet firing at the rate that you would have expected it to, with consumers doing as well as they were doing. And right before COVID, the Builder Confidence Index, housing prices were always, on an upward trend and looking good, but new residential construction, the pending home sales indexes, the existing home sales indexes, they were not where I would have expected them to be and others would have expected them to be until right before COVID, when it looked like 2 years of a strong consumer were finally going to set them on the trajectory that they needed to be in order for the economy to really be firing on all 4 cylinders. And then COVID happened. All right. A lot of the strong job growth that you hear being touted by the Biden administration and others over the last year and a half has really been trying to recover a lot of these jobs that we had lost, right? And we did not recover many of them. Construction in the first month of reopening the economy when Donald Trump was still president. Construction, for instance, recovered half of the jobs that were lost from the COVID shutdown in 1 month. I think manufacturing was like 22%. So there was already this. Employment was the one area where it was lagging, where all the other, this is CPI, by the way, for inflation, leveled out. It returned to the mean in how much it rose every month. So it was very clearly, it was very clearly stable again before the change in presidency. I mean, that's just true. Anyone who can look at a chart knows that. But job growth was less inclined to bounce back that quickly. And what we saw really were like lagging reports that some of them looked real good. Some of them were very big disappointments. This one this month is a very big disappointment. So the ADP employment report, which is of payrolls, it is not a household survey like the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports on, the monthly jobs report or the monthly employment situation, as it's called. That is a household survey. This is of actual, ADP is a payroll processing company. So they're looking at their actual, it's hard data, all right? And if we were going to see a bounce in the holiday season of some of these private payrolls, we would have seen this. Unfortunately, we did not, all right? So forecasts range from a low of 150,000 to a high of 220,000. The consensus forecast was 200,000. With all of the jobs that we still have yet to get back, that's not a great number, but it still would have been better than what came in. And it came in at 127,000, which is really low. That's garbage. And it's especially garbage for the holiday season. All right. There's also more, there's a lot more here. And again, I mentioned it, I referenced it. Morgan Stanley's housing forecast is abysmal. Housing prices being the worst revision I've seen yet. They're forecasted next year to enter negative territory. So house prices are going to fall. Not great. The international trade in goods advanced. The deficit for goods unbelievably widened to almost 100 billion. Negative 99. Forecast range from a low of negative 94 billion to a high of 88, negative 88. And the consensus was for negative 91.9. So this, again, is much worse, much deeper of a deficit than was expected. It narrowed by more than 6 billion in September to 92 billion, roughly, because it was already pretty bad. But that, even if it was revised considerably, this time it still looks just awful. Awful. So while inflation, and I know nobody likes to hear about corporate profits, right? Everyone, if there's corporate profits, everyone's like, oh, profits were only 1.3. Oh my God, I'm wrong. After tax year over year was only 1.3. That's a difference from year over year last year of 7.3. So that will trickle down. I know a lot of people love to make fun of the supply side economic, theory, but I don't know how many times it's got to be true. I don't know how many times it has to be so obviously true for people to realize it. But also, corporate profits and, dare I say, corporate tax structure has an enormous impact on wages and wage growth. And we're already in a place where inflation is so bad that real wages are not rising. All right. So how much more of this can we take is a great question. Let's see what this is already, from what I understand, already in the works. The pending home sales index. This is by the National Association of Realtors. That, along with the existing home sales index, is a staple economic indicator for the housing market. It wasn't as bad as it was for September, and by the way, September was revised slightly better. So it was initially reported that month-over-month sales fell by 10.2%. When it was revised this month at 8.7, we're still looking at a negative 4.6. So it's more bad news for the housing market. And it measures pending home sales. It measures contracts that have been put in place for purchasing homes, obviously, right? So it is a lagger because you have to enter into the contract before it can be acknowledged and reported. The Chicago PMI completely freaking collapsed. This is a horrible, horrible reading. Purchase Managers Index is another staple, especially for good producing services. Especially the Chicago is important because there's a difference between just dealing with manufacturing and other goods producing industries that deal with domestic versus foreign. So the fact that this fell as bad as it did is horrible and nowhere near the consensus. Actually, let me just pull it up so you guys can look at what consensus I'm talking about. When we used to do PPD, we used to do our own consensus, but it largely was more like the Econo Day. If you go to the Wall Street Journal or Reuters or Fox News, they'll say the forecast was. They all use different forecasts. They all have their own standard, and many of them are really no different than surveys like polls. So we always tried to do the very same. It's the same thing as the idea behind an RCP average, where there are some forecasts that perform better than others. But there are most definitely forecasts that you can average together to get a more consensus and a better idea, and that tend to perform better. It really did than individual ones by Reuters, the Wall Street Journal. And anyway, here we go. And we included private equity firms and everything that did their own forecasts. I believe Econo Day does too, but for instance, let's take a look at it. This is a horrible result. So the prior wasn't great. Anything above 50 indicates expansion. Anything below 50 indicates contraction. So as you can see, this is not fantastic. And this actually, here you go. The Institute for Supply Management, this explains it a little bit, compiles a survey and a composite diffusion index of business conditions in the Chicago area. Since October of 2011, the survey has been conducted by Market News International and MMI. You guys, some of you may read them. Manufacturing and non-manufacturing firms both are surveyed. Hence, it is not directly comparable to pure manufacturing service. That's true. That's the point I'm trying to make. It's not like the ISM. They changed the name. It used to be called the NMI, the non-manufacturing index, while the manufacturing index used to be called the PMI. But now we have the services PMI and the manufacturing PMI from ISM. They're separate. They change the name like every couple of years, I swear. At least it feels like it. Manufacturing and non-manufacturing firms are both in this. Readings above 50 indicate an expanding business sector. Readings below indicate a contracting. This one, with what I love about what Econoday does here, and I should have showed you this with employment, the consensus divergence index is how badly is it off from the forecasts. As you can see, it trends it trends with it, but we've had some pretty bad gaps in some months. This is for November, so again, for the start of the holiday season. And the PMI, the Chicago PMI fell from 47.1, from 45.2, to 37.2. This is a most horrible and ugly number. The range was only from a low of 45 to a high of 48. And again, I need to point out that some of these, including the ADP report, are the worst since the COVID recession, whatever you want to call or put a name on the artificial recession that was created by shutting down commerce during the pandemic. It was not an organic recession. I called it the Fauci recession on social media before, but it could be the COVID recession, the pandemic recession, whatever you want to call it. It was very short. And these indexes, obviously, employment indicators took a huge hit during that time. And in many cases, historically, we just hadn't seen anything that bad. When it comes to jobs and some of these PMIs, we're hitting territories as if we're in an artificial shutdown. Sorry, need more water. Yeah, so it's not good news. And a couple more here. Again, ADP was the same. JOLTS, that's the other one I wanted to go over. Let's go over JOLTS. Come on, JOLTS. JOLTS is the job opening and layoffs, right? So job openings were expected to fall this month. They just fell more than they were expected to fall. The consensus was about 10.5 million. They fell to 10.3. Right, I'm rounding. The consensus range, that's the low end of the forecast range, 10.3 to 10.6. But it is true that September was significantly higher than expected, and it called into question the degree of labor shortages that some were discussing. But again, there was a revision. It wasn't a significant revision, but it has fallen again. So, some volatility there, I guess, is the way, the way to look at it. This is out now, right? Yes, it is. I was waiting. I'm looking at it for the same time with you. So uncertainty for sales growth and employment's down a little bit. Uncertainty for employment growth, which, take the good with the bad, right? Sales growth, however, is the uncertainty surrounding sales growth is continuing. So I believe this is the Atlanta Fed. Yep, Atlanta Fed. So not great, folks. Not great. Not great. Yeah, I mean, let me look at where some of what Laura has talked about here. Well, Corn Pop, that's a really good question, and that surrounds Arizona. So they said techs were at polling places before they failed. Were there any techs in blue areas or just in red areas? I'm not the best one to ask that. I have been basically inundated with, it's just not my role, but I have been inundated with people through emails and others where, they said that they were unable to get a tech, poll workers I'm talking about, that they called, there's a hotline if there's issues like this, and that you call the hotline, and that they'll try by phone if there isn't a tech on site to walk you through what the problems could be. And then if they can't help, they'll dispatch a tech. And from what I understand, it's just not, it's not the case that these techs showed up on site. I can't tell you whether they were in blue areas versus red areas more. That's a good question, though. I'm not sure it changes anything, though, right? The bottom line is these issues, they act like they were resolved by a certain time of day or something. And the truth is they weren't. And that small 2% figure that I threw at you, from the hour of 6 to 9, I mean, it is nothing for Maricopa to put up that big 45 number early in the morning. And then for, every hourly drop, and there's always a surge after work, but every hourly drop, there could be, 18 to 25,000 reported. So, if you just look at a few shy here, from the 6 to 12 hour, you could easily get to that 2% number. I mean, it's not hard at all. There was just going to be a lot of people who, look at it from an average person's perspective. It's hard. And sometimes this is why maybe Republicans now will start to, I love how everyone's taking credit for it, but maybe Republicans now will start to realize that you really may not like the game, but you have to play the game that is handed to you. You have to play the hand that you're dealt. And if you want to change the game later, then you can. But, I was a minority voice. It's maybe because, I lived in Florida for so long. We always voted by absentee ballot. I voted by absentee ballot. I did both. I did. And for years when we were there, you could change. One year you could you could request an absentee ballot, and the next year you could go vote in person. Even for someone like me, and I live in this world, even for someone like me, if I leave my vote till election day, it could be difficult for me to vote. There was a line where Laura and I went. Now, I'm not going to leave unless I absolutely have to, but I can foresee a circumstance where something with work pulls me away. And if I'm only giving myself 6 to 8 hours to get to the polls, then I could conceivably screw myself from being able to vote on an election day. It happened to me one midterm. I normally always vote, but it happened to me one midterm many years ago. And it also happened during we used to have off-cycle mayoral elections in Gainesville where I lived, and I always vote in off-cycle elections. I missed a mayoral election one year because I was so busy with work. And so it can happen to somebody like me. It's definitely going to happen to, normies. And I have to say, when you look at the late campaign specifically, that is the candidate that brings out normies, not particularly partisan. If they're going to show on election day, it's because they're being, kind of pushed to do it. They're going to make somewhat of an effort to do it. Maybe they just forgot. These are the people who would forget to put themselves on the permanent absentee ballot list or something. Over the years, however, very quickly, this will accelerate quickly. They're going to do that. And this is why Republicans who kind of recognize that, Florida, even Republicans in some areas of North Carolina, some areas of California, of New York, they knew that. They knew that was the case. That if you don't get these lower propensity voters to vote by mail, they're probably not going to vote at all during a midterm. So, that saved people like Mike Garcia. That saved people like Mark Molinaro. It may save John Duarte, even though we haven't called that race yet. It's the one that hasn't been called, at least not yet. Not that I remember getting the email. There may be, still some vote out in Merced and Stanislaus that doesn't go Duarte's way, and they're separated by 600 votes. So, Boebert went out there, got that race was extremely close when her opponent went out, and basically everything in Colorado was mail-in votes, but they're out there now, even beyond that part of the game. They're curing, they're doing whatever. So Republicans have got to learn to do those fights. They have got to do those fights. And this is great. Josiah Magnuson. This is another reason why this argument that turnout in Maricopa was somehow so high it couldn't have been higher. This is another reason why, Josiah, great question, why that doesn't hold water. Do you think red flight from lockdown states played any role in the election? I do think that's why you have some areas in Florida, for instance, that's a great example. I think flight from blue states, red flight from blue states to North Carolina had an impact. The difference, the variable here is vote by mail. That's it. So if there was more vote by mail than expected versus lower election day than expected, then that is what explains some of the differences in voting behavior, even though the demographics of comparable areas were similar. A great example of that was PA 5. I pulled that race and I pulled Virginia 10. They both at some point looked close. Virginia 10 stayed close. PA 5 stayed closer than it should have been, although Scanlon still had a lead. Yet, when all the votes were counted, Humcow still it was closer than people expected, and Scanlon in PA 5 was not. It was still pretty big win for Scanlon, even though the polling didn't seem to support that. And then also, those districts are very comparable. Both have high populations of white, suburban, educated voters that have been trending Democrats lately. They both have high concentrations of African-American voters, and then a small conservative constituency with a big moderate ideology, self-described ideology chunk of the electorate. So that's why it was looking like if those voters swung, those races could be closer. And everyone said, well, Virginia 10 is close. It's going to be a tsunami. It was close. Yet Wexton was able to hold on slightly. So was Abigail Spanberger in 7, which is an area that's much more conservative. What's the difference? More vote by mail. What's the difference between PA and Virginia 10? More vote by mail. That is the explanatory variable so far. That's it. What was the difference between these areas of Washoe that went either for Cortez or Laxalt? Vote by mail. Washoe was the key to that because Laxalt did exceedingly well in Clark County. Both him and Lombardo did. They lost Clark County by a smaller margin than Dean Heller lost it when he still won statewide. What's the difference? Vote by mail. So vote method has an enormous impact on that margin, vote preference, whatever you want to call it, but on the margin for each candidate. All right. So that's a really good question because it disproves, Josiah, those people who are leaving those states went to places like Maricopa County, went to places like if you were a red flight out of California, Maricopa's a top destination spot. If you were a red flight from New York, the 2 top destination spots are, there are 2 in Florida. It's the Tampa area and South Florida, and then Maricopa County in Arizona. So this idea, it disproves it, or at least it contradicts the argument that somehow Maricopa could not have been higher turnout. All you needed was a modest increase in the turnout that came from Election Day to, put that race at least within mandatory recount territory. And by the way, in these other flight destination states, turnout did exceed 2018 levels. Nationally, it was down, but in many of these other states, it did exceed those levels. So it seems like in that respect, Arizona is actually the one that's a one-off. And given that they had such a high-profile, 2 high-profile races there, you're telling me that the Masters versus Kelly and the Lake versus Hobbs races were lower profile than Evers versus Ayers and Barnes versus Johnson? That doesn't make a lot of sense at all. Do we know anything about the I'll get to that in a second. Let's somebody had asked about the vote for speaker. Could Democrats end up picking a speaker if McCarthy loses? You know, I mean, the technical answer to that is yes, given what we have heard. And that's why you see people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who openly admits that Kevin McCarthy is not a conservative. That's why you see people like Marjorie Taylor Greene supporting Kevin McCarthy, while Matt Gaetz, doesn't. And I got to tell you, personally, I kind of feel like I kind of side with Matt Gaetz on this one. I do. Because look at the Senate. I mean, the bottom line is, folks, if you're a Republican voter, your biggest problem is representation, or the lack thereof. Even your elected officials don't represent who you are. So, well, that is not the case with Democrats. They are well represented by their, their constituents are well represented by their representatives, by their elected leaders. That is not the case with Republicans. Just look at the bill before with Romney, Susan Collins. She's one thing. She's from Maine, but Susan Collins didn't win re-election, surprisingly, even though every poll had her down. She didn't win re-election because the 1st congressional district supported her en masse. The 2nd congressional district made sure she won by the margin she won by. Now, how do you think they feel about that same-sex marriage bill? And it's because it's not a same-sex marriage bill. It's not. That's not what people have a problem with who oppose that bill. It puts the transgender issue on par with the same-sex marriage issue. And for many Republicans that oppose that bill, that's their problem. So Mitt Romney had to obviously get the LDS church, pull them by their hair, whatever, to get them to support the bill. Even though Mike Lee on the other side, who he did not endorse, by the way, Mike Lee had to stand on his own and oppose it. Let me tell you something. Regardless of what the leaders of the LDS church say, how quick do you think members of the LDS church are going to be to, I mean, they already, oppose same-sex marriage, but how quick do you think they're going to be to jump on board with the transgender protections that are in that bill? I mean, people just they haven't read it. They're obviously not. They're not going to like it. So is Mitt Romney representing their views? John Thune, he was one of them as well. And then look at the statement he made the other day. He wants to use the debt ceiling to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. This is how stupid these people are. The last Republican president to win Rust Belt states in more than 4 decades opposed cutting those programs. Yet John Thune, he's living in the old conservative, dynamic, and he and others want to cut those programs while their voters are older voters. I mean, many of them are senior voters. So are they looking out for their interest? And so where am I going with this? Matt Gaetz is right to say that it doesn't matter what we're risking here. The truth is, Kevin McCarthy could just resign, and not resign from his position but he could back out of the running for speaker if he truly cared about the unity of his party and the will of his voter. What happened in this November was a repudiation of them. They should have won 245 seats. At least. This was the year they could have cracked their 247 seat ceiling. They absolutely should have done that. They had the popular vote advantage to win 240. They didn't because of it. He failed. His leadership is one of the biggest stories out there. Vote by mail is a big story of the midterm elections. They effectively rendered the Republican built-in advantage of having a more efficient vote because it's more dispersed rather than concentrated in urban and metro areas, and the enthusiasm gap. They rendered both of those advantages useless or ineffective, but with vote by mail. That's no question. But it's only part of the story. Both Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy believed that they had seats to spare. They thought without a doubt, Mitch McConnell thought without a doubt he was going to end up the majority leader. To him, it didn't matter if it was 51-49 or 54-46. To him, it didn't matter. Here, rower in the background. He's going to get what he wants regardless of whether he's got another 3 votes. So he sacrificed Blake Masters. He only did what he felt like he had to do for Oz and Walker, to make it look like he wasn't abandoning them. Baldak, he abandoned. They were at best schizophrenic with the strategy of how they were going to fund these candidates. They gave money to candidates that were always going to win in a landslide. It didn't make any sense. He did that on purpose. They did that on purpose. The issue of self-sabotage is real. McCarthy thought that he could let Joe Kent go down. McCarthy thought that he could let John Gibbs go down. And in fact, it would help. He thought he could let Sandy Smith go down, but it wouldn't hurt Bo Hines. Why? He was going to make it up with his hand-picked candidates like Vega, with his hand-picked candidates like Rhode Island too, in several areas in the Northeast that they thought they were going to win and they did not. So again, I see Gates's argument where if it really doesn't matter if Democrats wound up getting a speakership for 2 reasons. One, it's like, in truth, is Kevin McCarthy really any better? In truth, is he? Because, maybe he'll stop some areas. You'll get investigations and committee assignments that you'd want to get if you were in the majority. But at the end of the day, is it not going to still be the same end result, which is something I didn't get to with the economy, and I want to. And so, we have time. I'm going to circle back to that. And then, secondly, it's a false choice is what Matt Gaetz is arguing, because if McCarthy realizes he doesn't have the votes, and he doesn't, I can tell you right now, I don't have my phone on me. Otherwise, I'd have some really good text to read to you. In fact, I got the text. I can look because it's connected to this laptop right here. Hold on. Where are you? Where are you? I mean, some of them are just... Where's that group? It should be in a group. Here it is. Okay. So there was a poll with the California GOP yesterday, and Kevin is calling in the troops. Jessica Patterson is his right-hand girl in the California GOP. He's got another one as well. He's calling them in to go to D.C. to try to make the case for them. They were going to, but now they've canceled those trips because he doesn't have the votes. They did a informal vote count, and they don't have it. So first it was, we're going to go to help you. Then they thought they had it sewed up. So it was just, we're going to go and celebrate. But now they're not going, these people, because he doesn't have the votes, and them going out there really doesn't help him at all. There's no reason why any of these lawmakers would listen. So if you're Kevin and you're in that position, right, then Gaetz is right. You should just step down, and maybe somebody like Steve Scalise has the votes, right? Or Jim Jordan, who supported Kevin McCarthy. He most definitely would get the votes. So he supported you. If you didn't get it done, why is Jim Jordan out of the question? Jim Jordan's from a state that Republicans just romped in. Mm-hmm. It's the heart of the Republican base at this point, folks. Is Florida, Ohio, Texas. That's the heart of the Republican base. Why wouldn't someone from Ohio be the speaker as opposed to somebody from California? So, and it's a really good question, but if they don't get their act together, Blackfish, they can end up with a Democratic speaker, which would be Hakeem Jeffries, by the way, because there were these moderate Republicans who were like McCarthy or bust, or at least, that's what they were threatening anyway, that they said they would vote for a Democrat like Steny Hoyer. However, Steny Hoyer didn't get the leadership now. So I would say, I dare you to do that. I dare you to vote for Hakeem Jeffries, because that's their leader now. That's done. They replaced Nancy Pelosi with Hakeem Jeffries, a collusion truther, a collusion pusher, an election denier who called Donald Trump's election illegitimate. I dare any Republican, moderate or not, to vote for that guy over Jim Jordan, over anyone else, Steve Scalise, right? And I'm not saying Steve Scalise is any better. I mean, I don't know. I'm simply saying he may be someone who can get the votes where clearly Kevin McCarthy cannot, because it was Kevin McCarthy and Emmer who really are being blamed right now for this underperformance. And Emmer only won because somebody cast their vote incorrectly and they won't let him redo it. So so that hurt. That's no doubt hurting Kevin even more, because people are pissed that they're using some kind of technicality to withhold that congressman's ability to take his vote back and vote for somebody else. I think everybody who is a part of the base on the Republican Party, on the Republican side, would rather have Jim Jordan. I don't even think that's a question. All right, let's Honey Badger, if voter turnout is calculated based on dirty voter rolls, how could we possibly determine true voter turnout? Well, that's a really good question. And actually, we can remove the dirt, at least to some degree, from the voter rolls. So we know, how much of the voter roll is suspected deceased. We know how, or at least I do, because we have the database. But we have the number that have change of address flags, meaning they really are not eligible to vote in that state anymore because they have a change of address flag and moved to some other state. And even with those in place, it's true, Honey Badger, that even with those in place, no matter how much we try and how much we try to stay on top of it, every time we pull a list, 100,000, let's say, randomly from the voter file to do a poll, we hear from people, I'm sorry, this is not, I don't live here anymore, right? In Arizona, for instance, I don't live here in Arizona. So that's why we really do use those turnout screens and vote history to determine who is going to vote. And the trickiest thing about it is whether or not how many new voters will be in the electorate, but then also, are there really those low propensity 2 out of 4 voters, for instance, or 1 out of 4 voters who will show up and vote? And that's really just part of your job. The reason why I'm confident in making the claims that I am is because other things were right. The model was right on other things. So it doesn't really make any sense that it would be wrong on this one thing. And again, speaking of like a vote by mail thing, if you were to weight our data by vote method, you would get a 0.2 of a percentage point lead for Hobbs. And nobody weights by vote method, folks. I mean, that's not what you're supposed to do. So it's a, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Right. Wink, wink. That's a good question, though. The truth is, we do the best we can, and then we look back when we have actual votes, and we decide whether or not we were accurate. How close did we get? We need to do a deep dive, Jonathan. Need to do a deep dive with Barnes on the statewide results in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Well, we're already on a lot of that. And I can tell you that the vote by mail lead built up in southeastern Pennsylvania on behalf of Democrats was enormous, significant. So you would need it really has changed the game. You would need to play the same game. You're going to have to play the same game. And I'm sorry, but it really will come down to this, especially with lower propensity voters. Who gets to these voters first? Who gets to the door? Who gets to the text message? Who gets in some form? Some can. Face-to-face is just the most powerful, especially when it comes to any form of harvesting, legal or not. I mean, I'm talking about legal harvesting or get out the vote. It's just, and that's actually what it's more appropriate, should more appropriately be called in this new era. Republicans are trying to win a turnout game, a persuasion game, whereas Democrats are trying to win a game of gathering and banking. And that is the game at this point. So Republicans should take note of that. They're going to have to learn to compete with that. So in Pennsylvania, again, it's a great example of what I was talking about before, Jonathan. There are other districts. VA 10 was right on the board with a district like PA 5. Here's another one too. I believe it's PA 6. Very similar demographics. Very similar. And yet, one had a significantly higher share of vote by mail than the other. And it looks like that is what did it. But we are doing that. It's just that, again, anyone who claims that to have made these profound discoveries at this point, you're doing so based on, well, many of them are doing so based on exit polling and whatnot. We like to look, now that we actually have real votes to look at, we like to look at the actual voter data. And some are slower than others to get that to us. Like, for instance, talking about Arizona, I would love to prove without a shadow of a doubt, nothing more, that the people who agreed to participate and then said they could not vote on election day, therefore did not do the exit poll. I would love if Maricopa would make that information available to us, because then I could cross-reference those people that we pulled from the voter file. We could cross-reference them. Now, eventually, my vendor is going to update and tell us whether or not that these people, in fact, did cast a ballot or not. That's going to happen. So we'll be able to look at that. But it's just not happening right now. And that is ultimately the problem when you have situations in elections like this. It's such a short amount of time after something happens, after an election is conducted. It's such a short amount of time and so few remedies to be able to move forward. And you have to put forward an extremely strong case, even though they don't have a whole lot available to you to do so. So I would, believe me, that's the first thing I would have loved to do. Do I think the red wave was a psyop? No. I mean, guys, and that's a good question, Alex. It's a good question. But I ultimately think that I know what the potential was for this election. They blew it. They just blew it. Vote by mail was used masterfully as a way to make their vote more, make the Democratic vote more efficient. Republicans did not do it. And then also there was a lot of internal sabotage on behalf of Republicans. But, our generic ballot isn't that far off at all. And we conducted it when? In October. When did our generic ballot come out? It's like the beginning of October. It may have tightened a little bit if we would have conducted it late, one more final to the election. But for the most part, how much better Republicans did with postgraduate degrees, that happened. And what we showed with the electorate, how much better Republicans did with 4-year degrees that we were showing, that happened. I really do just think that sometimes there is a way, operatively, there's a way to maximize your vote. And in this new era of vote by mail, Democrats know how to do it, and Republicans don't. Plus, Democrats don't sabotage each other. They did. No. Hold on. Let me just check something. I think somebody's misinterpreting what happened. I'm looking at it. Speaking of which, yeah, it's just the Democrats. Oh my God! For a second there, somebody made me think that the question before about Republicans bailing to elect a Democrat speaker. Somebody made me think that happened. They're misinterpreting. It was just that Democrats have chosen Hakeem Jeffries. Isn't he the one? Yes, he is, isn't he? Who seriously thought Guam was going to tip over because there were too many military assets on the island? He's that one, right, Laura? That's him. I mean, I kid you not. No, I kid you not. I think that's him. Hold on. I may even have a clip of it. Hold on. I may have a clip of this. And people are like, oh, he was just kidding. He was just kidding. No, he was not kidding. He was deadly serious. Yeah, soon, by the way, because I'm looking at on PPD right now to get that clip. Soon you will see. What in the Sam Hill? Yeah, on PPD, soon you guys will see the new video up for Georgia. All right. Should be interesting, which will get me into the next question. I'm getting there. Why didn't I just search for Guam? Guam would have did it. Let me look. Right? I'm telling you, it was him. For some reason, that brought up Jack Johnson. Trump pardoning Jack Johnson. I could have swore we had this. I guess we don't, but I could have swore we did. So let's look at some of the. Yeah, I mean, it's a choice between me doing the. I don't know. See, you notice what Google's doing? They're putting all these other phony aggregators ahead of RCP. They really are. All right. So Fabrizio and Anzalone, that's old. That's really old. They have Warnock up by, they had Warnock up by 4, but that's a really old poll. And Fabrizio and Anzalone did not do a great job this year. So that is just the truth. They did a better job in the primary. They had Johnson winning by like 5, Evers winning by like 3 or 4. Here it is. Laura's got it. I knew Laura would get this. Oh, I'm not letting this go. Are you kidding me? We've absolutely got to show what they nominated. And then there's, tweet after tweet after. Oh no, that's not Jeffries then. Tweet after tweet after tweet from this guy about Russia collusion, and he said the more we learn, the more obvious it was become that this election, 2016 election, was illegitimate. This is what he has said. And then there was another one by somebody else that had it all tied up. And, I got to tell you, I'm skeptical of, why am I skeptical? Because I'm skeptical of Walker's ability to win this thing. And I'm going to tell you why, even though I thought he would win a runoff, because vote by mail has changed the game so much. And I don't know that they have enough time to do that. Now, Republicans outnumber Democrats in Georgia. And if it's the same electorate, then Oliver clearly took from Walker. I don't think anybody disputes that the Libertarian candidate, that's Hank Johnson. Thank you. I don't think anybody disputes that the Libertarian candidate cost Walker. I think it's very clear he did. Because he's not getting all this support from the Atlanta metro area. He got a support from, there's a lot of research to show that if somebody like like a candidate like Oliver is on the ballot, it takes 2 to 1 from Republican vote over Democrat. So I don't think he's screwed. I just think that he's going to need a very big turnout. Herschel Walker, he's going to need a big turnout. Low turnout is not what people think. So the turnout was low in the runoffs with Ossoff versus Perdue and Warnock versus Loeffler. Remember, the turnout was low there, and that costs Republicans. So I actually think they need a bigger turnout. Yeah, Laura is a treasure. She is. But let's look at it's just an old poll. There was another poll I was looking at yesterday. Let me see if I can find it, because it actually went into some detail about who was going to vote and by what vote preference. If you're not doing at this point the difference between vote preferences, then I'm not sure it's even worth it. I'm not sure you're even worth looking at anymore. I'm not. And look, see, here's another one. Zogby. Looks like Trump bounced back. He's there. It is. I found it. Let's pull this up to answer this question. But DeSantis did soar in that one as well. Now he's back. He's still at 28%, and it's a long way to go folks, between now and the presidential nomination contests, it's a long way to go. I just ultimately think Trump is the only one who can beat Trump. I really do believe that. He continues making mistakes the way he made. I don't think people care about the Fuentes thing. I think, frankly, when they see how am I supposed to say Kanye's name now? I don't know. When they see like Ye and Fuentes pull what they pull, I think that actually pisses the Republican voter off more again, and that pushes people to Trump. All right, so Milo, you didn't really help anybody. If your goal is to screw over Trump, I think you helped him. I do. You're acting like the Washington Post or something. So you're actually making people mad that you would do something like that. Is it yay? Is it yay? I don't know, Noodles. I don't know. Yeah. But I will say this. Yeah. That's another good question. Richard, can you grab Richard Slater's question, Laura? Yeah, thank you. That's a good one. I may want to end with that one because that's another one that seriously doesn't. You know what? Everybody go bother Barnes about what are the odds. I'll do it. I love to do it, and I will do it. I just don't know what's going on. All right, so this is the what is it? The Fredericks poll, and they have some pretty cool result summaries here. Oh, I should have showed you this. That they admit our poll paints a less rosy picture for the incumbent senator than the current national narrative of the campaign, which seems to be favoring Warnock. Okay. All right. Pretty big sample, 939 likely December 6th runoff voters. Again, we're going to be doing live coverage December 6th. The map will be up. We will be doing it. And I want to just mention this. We will be offering that to the other tier as well because of what happened with Decision Desk on Election Day. And then for the higher tiers, we're going to be doing some other exclusive stuff for them. All right. And locals too, as well. I wanted to make that clear. So we're not trying to screw over the people who pick the tier with the run-ups, right? With the runoffs. It's just, we want to make it fair for everybody. All right. So they have no undecided. It's 50-50 dead heat. They tried to push and lean people, and it's 50-50, right? The hold your nose voters do not appear likely to defect from Walker. So Herschel Walker still holds on to 94% of the November Brian Kemp vote. All right. A small but potentially meaningful 11% of the Kemp Warnock vote say they will switch and vote for Walker in the runoff. And this is why every poll who's doing this should absolutely be asking, who did you vote for earlier for the first round? And do you intend to change your mind? Because there will be a small mind change. It won't be a lot, but it will be a small, because some people make decisions, and I mean some, meaning they're not particularly partisan. They make decisions based on what happened with the outcome of the election, okay? So Democrats are going to hold the Senate. Maybe I don't want them to have that big of a majority. Republicans have the House now. I can feel safe enough to vote for Walker. I didn't want to give Republicans the full, both houses of Congress. Those voters do exist. They do. Over 80% of those who either like both candidates or dislike both, which is 12% of all voters, they're voting for Walker in the runoff. The Chase Oliver Libertarian vote could impact runoff dynamics by nearly erasing Warnock's slim 36,465 vote November lead if they turn out in equal numbers and swing the Walker 2-1 as they do in this poll. So again, I tell you what, that wasn't even in the back of my mind when I said it. What was the Oxford research from years ago, but it's held this entire time, which is that if you throw a candidate like a libertarian or somebody who calls himself an independent candidate, if you throw that on the ballot, they will siphon, in most cases, they will siphon votes 2-1 from Republicans. All right. I think some of the exemption to that rule was Hillary Clinton in 2016. I think that hurt her in places like New Mexico. That hurt her in places like Minnesota. The runoff dynamics, ballot choices locked in. 97% said they are definitely voting for their choice. There are virtually no persuadable voters. Among the 3% who might switch, the vote is an even 51 to Warnock, 49 to Walker. And the reason why they call that even is because this is such a small sample that a 2% lead for either of these candidates is just not statistically significant. This is independents favor Warnock by a 52 to 48 margin. That's not enough. That's not enough. Or not enough to feel good, because there's a 6-point Republican advantage in party ID in the electorate, and Walker's getting 95% of them. Walker's getting 99, so that's how he's able to get close and tie with Walker. He's getting 99% of his base, where Walker's only getting 95. Republicans are having it's not a base problem. I don't want to call it that. It's a realignment issue where Democrats have realigned quicker than Republicans. There is this establishment moderate vote that is kind of doing this on purpose. They want to go back to the day of Mitt Romney, and they don't think that there's an electoral danger in that. Quite the opposite. So that's an issue for, and I saw it in our polling as well. That's an issue for Republicans. Walker's advantage with voters who like or dislike both candidates is offset by Warnock's 8-point advantage in voters who like Warnock better and vote 99% for Warnock. An increase in black vote, which is going 90% for Warnock, or an increase in non-metro Atlanta white vote, which is going 67% for Walker. That's how a Republican wins the state of Georgia. You've got to get that 2/3 non-metro white vote. Can swing this dead heat one way or the other. Walker also benefits from an increase in turnout among an increase in turnout among women under 55, which is 64% of the vote, while Walker benefits from a higher percentage of whites, 65 plus to 69, who are voting 69% for them, for him. All right, so I like how they actually broke that down by their vote, which is pretty close. So did not vote, but will vote in the runoff, 3%. That's kind of believable to me because early voting is going gangbuster right now. What did the vote? It's only Kemp by 5. I think Kemp underperformed. I do. Even though obviously he won. I think he underperformed his polls. November Senate vote was, what did we have Kemp by? 7? I have to go check. November Senate vote, Warnock 48, Walker 47, women 52, men 46, other 2. God, I hate that. We have no way to determine this non-binary question. We have no way to determine how much of the share of the vote that really is, and whether or not it comes this much from women, this much from men. There is no real baseline for that. We are forcing people to choose the gender, whether they identify with that gender or not. We are forcing them to make a binary choice. Non-binary choice, I'm telling you, you're going to get into a trap when it comes to weighting. Race, ethnicity, black or African American 20, white 72, others 8. Other 8. Walker won the Hispanic vote in Georgia, which is interesting. All right, let me go to Rich's for the last one here. All right. Rich, is this how many people who voted for a Republican House representative or Kimberly Yee and voted for Hobbs? Looking at the vote total, it suggests a lot. I think many of these people just simply didn't vote at all. I really do. And that is ultimately the issue. I don't think that explains the under-over vote. I think that's strange in and of itself, but that's something we've been looking at. It's always tricky to try to get into the under and overs. It is, but it's a good point. It's just we're looking at people solely who didn't vote at all. And had they certainly would have voted. I do just think too that there's some, what you're suggesting, I don't know if I want to say out loud, but
I mean, yeah, would I believe it? Yeah, I would. But I can't speculate about that. So that's a really good question. It is, and that's absolutely worth talking about, or at least pointing out that there was a significant undervote. But I can't deal with what's it called? I can't deal with the hypotheticals. I'm not sure there's any way for me to figure that out, so all I can deal with is the percentage of people who we thought we would capture but didn't capture, and here's why. Is there evidence that something turned them away at the polls? And yes, there clearly is. And is there enough of them that it would have put the result in doubt? And again, I think the answer to that is very clearly yes. Everyone wants you to believe that there needed to be 100,000 people turned away in Maricopa to upend this election. That is absolutely not true, because we are dealing with one batch of voters, one demographic of one vote method demographic. That is the election day voter. And I'm, went over it, but if you're an independent and you were in Maricopa and, overall, how did independents go? If you're an independent who voted on election day, you're going to be far to the right of that. And that is what makes all the difference in the world. It is that it disproportionately impacted the most favorable vote to one side of the ticket up and down the ballot, really. And that, judging by the margins that we know that side of the ticket was winning the vote by on election day, it does not take 100,000 votes to change it around. I mean, folks, 40,000 and Hobbs is a goner. I mean, the net from this margin is huge, and you can do some simple math on that. 31 to 34,000, depending on the margin. That's it. And definitely puts it in recall territory. Anything above 34 is going to put Hobbs behind. Why? Because of what we showed you before. And did I show you the table? I mean, let me show you the table of where the stuff came from. Let me get rid of the Walker poll. All right. Because this is something I'm putting together right now. All right. So this was part of the press release we originally did, but I've been expanding on it since. So in the first district, about 30% of those who experienced an issue, over under, about 30%, that was in Arizona 1. That was a 10-point interest. The other largest district to experience an issue, which was actually more than the first congressional district. Look at the Republican advantage in that district. In every single area where there was an issue, there is a Republican advantage. That's what, people really need to understand. It ranges from a low of 0.5, but again, they're smaller. Only 14% who had problems were from that area. 70+% were from areas where the advantage for Republicans is double digits. And then when you include the independents being much more likely to vote, and not much more likely, they were voting Republican if they voted on election day. When you include them, then you're getting to margins that are 70%. There. Then you're getting to margins that are 70% plus Republican, folks. So you don't need this massive number of voters to erase 17,000 votes. When you're winning 70, 74%, 72%, whatever, when you're doing that in areas where these issues occurred, 30-something thousand votes starts to net you enough to put the race in doubt. And definitely to put it in recount territory. And you could make a case that it was more than 2%. 2% is nothing. Nothing. If you don't think maybe 5% could have walked away, then you're an unreasonable person. People are not going to wait for 2 hours. And in fact, that is Laura, how many times on the campus in Gainesville, how many times in Miami-Dade have we heard Democrats make this very same argument to a federal judge? It's like every single election. The lines were too long. We need to keep the lines open because people are walking away. Enough to make a significant impact. So we have to keep them open to make sure people have more time after work. I think it is the height of intellectual dishonesty for what people are doing. The party that supposedly cares so much about voter suppression. Here they have a clear-cut case of something they claim could happen, has happened to them in the past, and a much smaller scale. I've seen one polling location with a lot of people have problems, have simple long lines, and judges be able to extend, judges like that extend the time that they could have. And by the way, had that judge simply extended the time for voters to vote, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. But because that judge chose to treat the Republican plaintiff in the lawsuit differently than Democratic plaintiffs have been treated in the exact same lawsuits, because they chose to do that, he took like the Twitter user position. Oh, you had all voting period to do it. What? That's a clear violation of Bush v. Gore. Election day voters were not treated the same as voters in other vote methods. They weren't. There were no tabulator, printer, toner, whatever issues when they were dealing with mail-in balloting. None. Only for election day voters were there problems and challenges. And when you're talking about 31% of precinct locations, and they are concentrated in areas where one party has a significant advantage over the other, then it's very, very, very obvious that there is at least the likelihood when the race is this close that it took it out of doubt. So, yeah, this very unconvincing argument that turnout was already kind of high. So what? Turnout was already kind of high in 2018 in Michigan. Why was it even higher this year? Turnout was kind of high in Georgia. Why during the runoff is it looking like it could be higher? Turnout was kind of high in Texas. How did it get even higher? It's ridiculous. In our precinct, turnout was enormous. There is no precedent in our own precinct, in Laura and I's own precinct. There is no precedent at all for turnout to have gotten to where it was in our precinct. There's no other comparable example, even in 18, where we could say, holy crap. Things change. You are using a hypothetical to deny what is a very clear possibility. Not based on hypotheticals. It's common sense. It's backed by the data, but it's common sense. Issues like that will turn away people. And the numbers are there to support it. The question is, where is everybody's common sense? Of course, this wasn't one or two locations. This was a third. Just under a third, at least. And it was all concentrated in areas that disproportionately harmed one party, which to me is a major red flag. I'm going to look for randomization in a situation like this. Yet, it isn't random at all. Not at all. It looks very clear. All right, so with that in mind, wow, we're over 210 already. I just want to say this. Yeah, I think, boy, Evan, I think Trump would rock it in Texas at this point. I do. I mean, I just would throw some warning signs up to Republicans in areas like Tarrant County. It's the last large population center that still remains Republican. I can see the vote by mail effort in Tarrant County. Republicans still showed up on early voting in person and in-person election day voting, so they were able to swamp it and everything. But I'm telling you, don't slack there, because they don't give up. They don't give up, and good for them. You got to applaud them for it. You've got to applaud them for it. And what else? Let's see. There's one more thing I wanted to talk about real quick before we go, which is the economic stuff that we discussed. I don't foresee Republicans being able to curb economic policy now that they don't have the Senate. The Senate is the chamber of commerce regulation. So the House, I just don't see them. They're not. Look, they sabotaged all the three of the toughest fighters that you would have had in the House. They sabotaged them. So you're really going to be disappointed if you rely on Kevin McCarthy and the slim Republican majority in the House. So I don't think they're going to be able to stall or avoid the economic issues that we're about to be facing. And unfortunately, if they're going to be dumb and sign on to cuts to safety nets, where people who, in case they haven't been looking at unpaid credit card debt and the percentage of people in businesses who can't pay their rents and their mortgages, and boy, I think you're really asking for it. Really asking for it. So I don't see any positives on the economic horizon. I don't. So, buckle up. Buckle up. I'm telling you, I called GOLDCO the other day again. Lou, talk to me. By the way, all that's in the description. TP in there. She's going to kill me over not getting enough during the financial crisis. This is never going to end. We're going to be 80, and she's going to be like, I told you to get gold, because now we're in like platinum and silver. That's the truth, because I'm gold. I think we're at the growth potential of gold. And look, there she is. She just popped her head.
A day late, $1 short.
I missed a lot of the
Millionaire.
gold surge. I missed a lot of the gold surge. I did. Didn't miss it all, but I missed a lot of it. And if you look at the charts, I really do think that platinum and silver have the most growth potential at this point. But I'm not giving you guys, but I'm just telling you what I think. Call an advisor, do what you want to do, But I'm like, yes, buy the silver. Jay Patel, buy the silver bars. The coins are overpriced. I don't want to give advice, but Jay, I agree with you. I think the bars, plus they look cooler. You can stack them. You can stack them. You can stack them. You can be like, get the coins if you want to be like Scrooge McDuck, but you're never going to get a safe that large. At least I'm not. I'll tell you that. Maybe some of you are very independently wealthy. You could be swimming in your own coin. But I just got my little bars. I like my little bars. I'm good with them. TPPlikesgold.com. TPPlikesgold.com. All right, so with that in mind, we'll be back Friday. And again, don't forget the Georgia runoff's coming up. We're going to do that live. All right, don't forget Alaska. We're going to do that live. All right, so check it out. Stay tuned. All right, we'll be back Friday, and we are going to be, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, we are going to be adding Republican nomination questions to the Public Polling Project going forward now. I know I dropped it in some of the others, but I'll do it one more time. Share far and wide. I'm going to put it in the things right now. Share, and then you guys can go ahead and share it far and wide. This is the post-midterm, we're going to call it, national poll. And again, I'm happy with my generic ballot polling. The one I'm really unhappy with, because everything else was within the sampling error. But what I'm really unhappy with, yes, I am streaming for Georgia, G-How, was Pennsylvania. Never, even though Oz only a tiny little lead, and it still technically is within the interval, I have never called the winner of Pennsylvania wrong. Never. So that one chaps my ass really bad. Really bad. And funny thing, if you don't remember, Trump's lead was so much bigger than Oz at any point in time that even if we adjust for what happened to Oz, Trump still would have won by 2.5 points. There was a vote, guys, and we should talk more about this on Friday. But there was a vote, guys. Marty, see you later, buddy. Or Marty Smith, fan Sue. There was a vote that was there that was for, and I'm not the only one who saw it. Believe me, pollsters talk. There was a vote that was for Trump, for generic Republicans, that was not there for named candidates. In Nevada was a big disparity. Georgia, a big disparity. Trump had like an 11-point lead when Walker was statistically tied. Nevada, same thing. Laxalt, barely up by 2, right? Up by about what, 2? It was like something like that. Lombardo, oh no, Laxalt by 1. Lombardo by 2? I don't know. I'd have to go and look. But, right, very close races. Trump, 9. It's a problem. It's a serious problem. And yet there are some people who like want to blame Trump for the underperformance. It makes no sense. And I know nobody's perfect, nation state. I know it just pisses me off to no end because everyone's going to be wrong here and there, and definitely in some states. But Pennsylvania, it was a great source of pride that I've never called the winner incorrectly, even when the races were so close. And that is just very unfortunate. Mike Braun leaving the Indiana Senate race for the governor's race. I've been gone for so long, I wish I could stay all day and just chat. I really do. But we'll be back Friday, and somebody, let me just say this. Who could vote for Uncle Fester, even if you hated Oz? No way. That's the thing. There's a huge difference between voting and persuasion and gathering of ballots, simply gathering ballots. And that made the difference. That's it. That is the difference, guys. All right. That's something Republicans are going to have to learn. All right. It's not a game of persuasion anymore. By the time the early voting period starts, Democrats see it as a race. The gun goes in the air, pop, they're off to the races. And the name of the game is race to gather as many as you can. And that's what they do. And they, by the way, in the case of Arizona, they very clearly got help from the Republican establishment. And that's something we can talk more about on Friday. But if you don't know or didn't realize yet, that there is an element of the Republican establishment. These are very rich, very powerful people. They don't want Donald Trump in the White House ever again. And that is why that's why they refuse to support Doug Mastriano, because to them, they feel like a Governor Mastriano would have ensured Donald Trump carried the Keystone State. They absolutely viewed Kari Lake to be a threat, not only from like what had happened in the past, but that what they were up to then, and they knew, and it was no secret, that Kari Lake was going to call a special legislative session to turn Arizona into Florida when it comes to election law. And that was no secret. And they were terrified of that. Why? Not only for their own prospects, but they knew that if Kari Lake did that, Donald Trump's carrying the state of Arizona. So a lot of these people ended up being victims of this effort to prevent Trump from becoming the president again, because they fear it like they fear nothing else. An unchained Donald Trump who doesn't listen to establishment advice and no longer tries to play, nice. And he did. He tried to play ball the first time around. The word is he has absolutely no intention of doing that again. So they can't have that, guys. They cannot have that. So, so with that in mind, I'm off to the races. We'll see you Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time. We'll talk much more about all this. All right, guys. See you soon. Thanks.
Don't you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love? Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit, and now here's